I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is 7 strategies to deal with queues in the contact center. I think it's going to be a fascinating webinar that hopefully you should all get a lot of value from. I'd just like to introduce you now to our speakers. We're joined by Richard Farrell from Netcall. Hello, Richard.
Hi.
And who'll be taking us through 7 strategies to deal with contact center queues. We're also joined as well by Stuart Meadows. Stuart is on the operations side of equity insurance partnerships, and Stuart will be joining our panel. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, Jonty.
Hi. So we'll be sharing some of his experience as well as commenting on the webinar as we go through. We'll then go into top tips from the audience, and we will also do interactive questions and answers. But before we get into that, into the agenda, what I'd like to do is just put up a poll. How often do you have long queues in your contact center? If you'd like to vote on that, the options are frequently, sort of on a daily basis, once or twice a week. You have seasonal peaks, or occasionally, and I'll share the results up on the screen. And the most common one here is frequently. We've got quite a number who've got seasonal peaks in here. There's a number that have got daily, once or twice a week, and it looks like we've got 15% of our audience are just very occasionally. Stuart, in your business, do you find it's quite seasonal, or is it tends to be a bit peaky, your traffic levels?
It's certainly seasonal, but it also can vary, again, depending on the weather. I mean, for example, at the moment with the bad weather across the UK, our claims area has experienced an uplift in call volume, as you would expect. So, yeah, it's a combination of frequently and seasonal peaks.
Yeah, and certainly it's quite interesting that the seasonal peaks. Put a tweet out a couple of days ago asking what was the difference between last Friday and the Friday before it, when you had snow and not snow, and one of the respondents said they'd actually noticed an increase in talk time of about 4%, which is presumably just people saying, "Oh, is it snowing where you are?" So it's, as well as higher call volumes, it could actually be a bit slower on that. So just thank you for voting in that poll. Now delighted to go to Richard Farrell from Netcall, and Richard will be taking us through a presentation about 7 strategies to deal with contact center queues. So Richard, if you could put those up on the screen, and if you'd like to take us through your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Jonty. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Just to give a little bit of background on Netcall and myself, Netcall are customer engagement specialists. We have a whole load of solutions which we deliver to more than 750 customers, predominantly in the UK. And that's right across public sector, health, and corporate world. And we have a number of products which specifically deal with the issues of queues. My experience, I've been in call centres for, it's coming up to 18 years this year. And the first part of my career was on your side of the fence, really, dealing with call centre operations, managing staff, dealing with things like peaks. And then subsequently I've been with Netcall for 11 years, and I'm now CTO at Netcall. So what I'm really doing here is trying to get the input from you guys to really help us with what we do next. So really, to put this into context, one of the really important drivers around the call center is that the expectations of the industry are changing. And a lot of that is driven by what customers now expect. And they expect excellence in terms of customer experience. And that's now led to customer service being a key market differentiator. And of course, if you can improve service and delight customers, then that can improve retention. And if you can reduce churn, that's very cost effective. There's lots of return for that. So we often get asked right at the start, how long is too long in a queue? And the answer is, it depends. And a really interesting piece of work that the ICMI produced a number of years ago determined 7 factors of caller tolerance. And we won't have time to go through all of these today and to read out all of the words, but just to give you the highlights.
And also there will be a copy of slides available afterwards if people do want to go through these later.
Yep, absolutely, and it's worth a look, and also reflecting in your organisation to see the impact of these. And we've already touched upon some of these, like the weather, which we'll get to in a minute on the next slide. But the first factor really on how long people are likely to queue is the degree of motivation. So we certainly see a very marked difference in how long people are prepared to queue for a commoditized sale type item compared to something which is a complex problem or a request for change with an existing supplier. So the degree of motivation for the call has a big impact. The availability of substitutes is becoming more and more important, and we find that customers will try and seek out alternative routes if they find call center queues, and this is the classic one where quite often you'll find that calls end up at a reception rather than going to a call center number because people are trying to get different routes in. And of course, depending upon the demographic, different technologies like email, chat, and automation are becoming more and more important. One thing that we also find is critical is the competition service level. If it's a perceived higher service level from a competitor, then you've got to be careful because the business might shift to them. And that may just be a perception, it may not be a reality, but of course as far as the customer is concerned, that can be very important. The level of expectation makes a difference. Some of the budget airlines, I think they definitely try and deliver sometimes a less than brilliant service to make sure that you that matches with your expectation. I'm paying a budget price, I'm getting a budget service. I'm not sure how planned that is for some of them. The time available is something that's really important, and we find that has a factor, an impact during the time of day. There's been a lot of press over the years about who's paying for the call, and certainly the industry is certainly a lot cleaner and tidier than it was a few years ago. But it's still the case, particularly for people on mobile phones and certainly for certain demographics, a call to a free phone number on a mobile phone could be particularly expensive. So that's something to think about. And then the final one is really just going back to Jonty's tweet last week, human behaviour. A good day, a bad day. Is it snowing outside? What's the weather like where you are? This all has a big impact on caller tolerance. So how long is too long? Well, it's all of those factors. And it varies during the day. There isn't a single answer. So there's a bit of research required, and customer surveys are very important for that.
It's also quite fascinating if you were to plot your call abandon curves, because that's quite interesting. Take a whole bunch of time to abandon, plot that on the graph. You can actually plot out when too long is in your organisation.
Yeah, and we've certainly found that some of the larger organisations that have lots of data and can do lots of really great analysis, you can get some really startling figures in there. One thing that we find, and I'll touch upon it as one of the strategies, is that looking at a weekly service level measure is not really good enough. You really need to drill down into days and intervals and lines of business to really get the full picture. Okay, so in terms of the 7 strategies, the first one that we've come up with is creative staffing strategies and actions to consider. One that's been in the press and around for 10 or 15 years is home working. The latest numbers that I've seen for the proportion of home workers in UK contact centres is half of 1%. So certainly there's a population there which is available. And something to think about as well is that these don't necessarily have to be full-time workers. These could be people who are doing 2 or 4 hours potentially. The classic home working example is Southwest Airlines in the US, where they managed to get lots of retirees in Florida who would log on for 4 hours a day, and that certainly, if you can schedule those appropriately, that can have a big impact on staffing at peak periods. The next one in there is pretty radical, and that's moving to a 4-day week, 4 by 10 hour weekly shift patterns. And the main thinking around that is that if you have an agent on a 10-hour shift, they can cover a peak time in the morning and also a peak time in the evening. Whereas if they're working a more traditional 8.5 hour or 8-hour shift, then they can only cover one of those peaks. We've seen other variants on that, so we've had a lot of our customers in the workforce management world who, when they've done lots of different analysis, have come up with things like 4.5-day weeks, so 4 long days and 1 short day. So really have a look at shift patterns, have a think about shift patterns. Organisations that stick to just a simple 5-day week with standard hours probably are missing a trick, so that's something to have a look at. Staff sharing alliances are really to look around your wider organisation, because it's often the case that some parts of the business are busy and other parts are quiet. And the classic examples are sales and service. Stuart mentioned earlier on about claims in insurance. Well, it's probably the case that when claims are busy, probably sales aren't so busy, perhaps. So it could be that you could share staff with other departments in the business. And also the start of a trend in the US as well, where you could also think about sharing with other companies. And it's a bit like outsourcing, but it's probably outsourcing plus, because you're really looking at a mutual relationship here rather than the supplier and customer relationship. So if you're on a business park with other call centres, have a chat. Have they got the same seasonal peaks as you have? Perhaps not. Is there something you can do to handle calls at busy periods with other companies? So they're quite radical in terms of staffing strategies, but have a think. Some things to consider.
The sharing staff with other departments might actually be easier, easier than you think. It's all about bridge building with other departments and having a quick pro quo, I guess.
Yeah, and certainly I've seen in the past when I was in call centre operations, we're customer service on one floor, sales on another floor, and never the twain shall meet. But yeah, let's talk to each other. The next strategy is around accurate forecasting and planning. The first point is that access to real-time accurate information is critical. So that's about getting the data in real time so you can do something about it. Something that we also see in terms of looking at demand forecasts is that just using simple spreadsheets is not really good enough for a couple of reasons. One is around exponential smoothing, and this will be really relevant with the snow in the last week. It snowed on this week this year, but it probably won't snow in the same week next year. So if you just try and use those averages or a moving average, you may overemphasize some of these outliers. So using exponential smoothing helps to lessen the weight of these phenomena over a period of time, gets you more accurate forecast. And the other thing that's really difficult, especially if you have complicated shift patterns, is to try and translate that forecast data into staffing schedules. If you're still trying to do that on Excel, it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to be very difficult intraday to use the real-time information that you've got to make changes to breaks, training, shift patterns, etc. So this is where workforce management really is a necessary tool to handle queues appropriately. Okay, one other strategy is to triage incoming calls. And just to define what we mean by this, in triage in healthcare is to determine the priority of a patient's treatment based on the severity of their condition. Now, we do have health customers, but this is also for all types of inbound calls. What you can do is determine the needs of the caller, gather information, and then transfer them rapidly to the right people. And with the information, it's something that can be used to prioritize and to also make sure that you get that information to the agent that's handling the call. So what might be the case is that whilst all callers are important, some callers may be more important than others. It may be that something like an account management function, something that's quite transactional, that may be a lower priority than, for example, a new business call. So it may be the case that you can triage the incoming call to ensure that you prioritize appropriately and then make sure you get that information to your agent. It's very important that the information that you do capture, which could be about the type of call, account numbers, other CRM data, it's very important that that's also delivered to the agents that answer the call, and that it's not a situation where you ask it once automatically and then you ask it again with the agent, because that's really very negative. We also see triage working as well as with automated technology. You can use people for that as well. So that's something that perhaps in conjunction with staff sharing alliances, in very busy times, for example, perhaps another department could answer the call quickly, determine what information is required and what the caller needs to do, and then a decision can be made after that rather than sticking them in a queue. Could be something that's quite easily resolved.
And just here, that a point, triaging here, this is a general contact center technique. It's not something that is just applicable to healthcare contact centers.
Yeah, so So the triage is, it came from the healthcare environment. There's lots of good things we can learn from healthcare in terms of prioritization. One other good thing that they do is surgeons have checklists as well.
Yep.
And that's something that perhaps we should widen scope.
And I guess probably triage is most common in technical support help desks, isn't it, where you have sort of quite complex calls that then can be passed off to a back office team, allowing the frontline group to then take more calls and then perhaps allocate work out.
Absolutely, it fits really well with multi-tier support functions as well. So yeah, absolutely. And quite often the first call into an IT support desk is a triage call, really. Yeah. So you may be reporting a call, but somebody else is then going to look into it. So yeah, healthcare and IT, but that can be addressed to a wider lines of business. Another thing which can help with queues is to blend calls, emails, and outbound calls. And what we mean here is that you don't necessarily have to deal with all of the interactions with the same handling priority. So whilst a telephone call may need to be answered within 20 seconds, you may have a service level for an email that it can be handled in several hours. So if you can shift some of your demand to lines of business that have less onerous service level requirements, you can actually reduce queues, telephone queues in the peak periods. So that's something to bear in mind. Outbound calls and emails, you can proactively inform customers about relevant timely information before they make an inbound contact. So rather than waiting until you've done something which means that they have to call you, tell them about it in advance. And that can be things like appointment reminders, it can be things like updates on information received, it can be things like balance or financial information. So there are lots of things that you can proactively inform customers about so they don't ring you up in a busy period. And then it's also the case that you can use automated systems to save even more agent time. And that can be automated in terms of speech recognition type solutions and IVR solutions which can handle transactions, things like meter readings, for example. Or it can also be on other types of channels, so you could have knowledge bases on websites, frequently asked questions, and so on. So you can do things to use systems so that inbound calls are lessened.
So we're just going to do a poll now on the topic of blending, and the question we ask is: do you blend calls, emails, and outbound calls? The options that you have available, and you can vote for more than one of these if they apply. Do you keep everything separate? Do you do some blending, but it's not widespread? Do you blend calls and emails? Do you blend inbound and outbound calls? Or do you blend calls, emails, and outbound calls? So if you'd just like to select which ones are appropriate, it might take a little while to get those in. Stuart, in terms of this continuum, do you keep everything separately within your organization?
Sorry, was that a question for me, Jonty?
Yes, just Stuart, do you...
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, do you blend calls, emails, and outbound calls, or do you keep things separate?
We try to keep things as separate as possible, but what we do find is that certainly with regards to people that work within our outbound team, we will move them across onto our inbound environment should inbound traffic dictate that. I think there is obviously a risk that you're not using the guys on a regular basis, so therefore sometimes from a knowledge point of view they may not be up to date. But as long as you're doing it on a regular basis and you're regularly exposing them people to the inbound environment, then there's no reason why you can't use it.
Yeah, indeed. And the results we got back from the audience, indeed, 36% of people are keeping it all separately. 24 blend calls, emails, and outbound. 24% blend calls and emails. Quite surprising, Richard, here. Not many people are blending inbound and outbound.
It's interesting, isn't it? And this is potentially an area where we're talking about staff sharing. It should be the case that, as Stuart mentions, with relatively minimal training in most examples, the outbound team could handle inbound calls at busy times.
Yes, indeed. So thank you for voting on that. We'll just...
So another tactic, another strategy which has been around for many years is multi-skilling. It's probably something that needs regular review. quite often we'll see that some very smart multi-skilled strategies are initially implemented, but over time as new lines of business, new features, functions come in, sometimes new skills are created, and that may lead to less than optimal staffing. And again, this is something that could be implemented across the organisation in conjunction with call triage and staff sharing. So it's not the case that your outbound agents would take the very first inbound call that arrives, but if all of your inbound agents are busy, then a secondary skill for your outbound team could be to handle an inbound call. And
certainly a very good point from Penny in the audience, who said it could be that a number of organisations don't do outbound, which is why perhaps that's not an appropriate sharing strategy.
Good point. Yeah, I suppose we should have asked the first question: do you do inbound and outbound?
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Call avoidance technique is something that is linked in really to the blending, because we're talking about different channels and different strategies. So I've already mentioned some forms of proactive contact. So you can avoid an inbound call by proactively contacting your customer, minimizing the need for routine call inquiries. So analyze what your calls are coming in for. If people are ringing up and asking what their balance is on an account, well, is it sensible to proactively contact them? Inbound automation for routine transactions. We're not saying that you should automate everything. We're not saying it's appropriate for everything. But certainly there are lots of routine transactions where live agents are not required, especially in busy times. And so there are some classic areas that are ripe for automation. We find in the public sector and local government that missed bins is an area that's ripe for automation. And we also find that things like meter readings in utilities can be very easily automated. We also find that some customers in utilities want to talk to people giving meter readings, especially if they're on single fuel and they want to upsell them, so they use the CRM information.
And automation doesn't necessarily mean on the phone through an IVR. It could also apply to a mobile app or to a website.
Yep, absolutely. And also channel shift to email and web to have more control over service levels. It's interesting that at the moment it seems that most of the shift to mobile for UK call centres is not necessarily apps or mobile web, but it's callers ringing from mobile phones. So they're using a mobile channel but still with traditional voice. So lots of the research is showing that for most demographics, landline calls are going down, but the actual talk time is not reducing.
Right,
They're just being substituted by mobile voice calls.
Indeed. An interesting point has just come through when you were talking about multi-skilling. Neil said that training of agents to become multi-skilled in high available times can mean that the agents in other areas are able to catch up on the overflow of calls when call volumes are high. So it's not just about multi-skilling the front line; it's about the overflow groups as well. So
yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah, as many tactics as you can to get more people available to take those calls. Absolutely. First contact resolution is key for a number of factors. In terms of queues, it's a real big driver to prevent unnecessary repeat calls. So that's really important. You can reduce inbound demand by reducing unnecessary repeat calls, resolve the contact and resolve the issue on the first contact. Of course, this also improves the customer experience, and customers want this. What we see is that it's vital to have the right metrics for this operation. So sometimes we've seen organisations in the past that will pay lip service to customer experience and first contact resolution, and then they'll have a big stick beating up agents for average handle time. So, we've got to be conscious that one 3-minute call may be better than two 2-minute calls.
Indeed.
So let's have the right metrics out there. And I suppose some of the traditional ACD metrics, we measure them and we try and manage them because they're there and they're easy to measure and they've been around for 15 years. But is an 80-20 service level right for your customers? Let's have a look at distribution of calls over time. Have a look at the AHT for your best agents. Are your most productive agents the ones who deal with shorter calls? Certainly in sales environments, you may find that longer calls are far more profitable. So just because we can measure it doesn't mean it's an appropriate metric to manage the operation.
In fact, there are a number of cases that say people if they know they're going to get their call answered, don't necessarily mind waiting a while, but that comes down to your 7 factors you had earlier.
Yeah, so if the level of expectation is such that they will get a really good response when they get through, then they'll be more prepared to wait for longer. If their expectation is that they won't get everything resolved, they'll have to ring up again, and then yeah, they'll probably queue for less time. So yeah, very important. Okay, so I think we've had the 7 factors in there. There's just a couple of slides here on how technology can help. So the first one is workforce optimization. It's critical in order to get the right people at the right place at the right time. It's critical for forecasting. We get the smoothing in there. We can add known events such as marketing promotions, annual payments, so you can start to build some of the seasonality in there. It's very important as well to look at intraday optimization. And too often we will see that call centers try and manage a day late. They'll try and manage on Tuesday with the information that they got on Monday. So in real time during the day, you can optimize to perhaps modify training or shifts or breaks or additional skills. And it's also something that you can do to look at the cost effectiveness of different strategies. So it may be that you can look at overtime as a tactic during the day quite early on in order to see if you can most effectively match to the service level. And the sooner you can do that, the better. Quite often we see supervisors desperately going around the call center at 4 or 5 in the afternoon saying, can you stay on for an extra hour? Well, all the data to make that decision was probably available at 10 o'clock in the morning. And of course, scheduling can be a very complex activity. So especially if you've got lots of agents, lots of different shift patterns, to try and turn the forecast data into scheduling is very, very labor intensive if you use old-fashioned technologies, and with workforce optimization you can really do that at the touch of a button. We'll just go straight over the channel shift one. I think we've talked about that. The other key technology that we find in peak queue times is callback, and this has a number of impacts. The first thing it does is it smooths out the peak demand. So our experiences with the QBuster product, the way that works is that based on your business rules, a caller will be offered the option of a callback. The callback will have an expectation about when it will take place, and depending upon the factors of tolerance in your line of business, that could be within 15 minutes, it could be half an hour, it could be later in the day. So that's a very important part of the process to make sure you know. And Stuart will be able to talk about how that works. The other thing that you can get from callback is that it will improve the caller experience. So where callers can be very negative about queue time, and it's the classic dentist waiting chair scenario, they always overestimate what the queue time has been rather than what it really is. You can really improve the caller experience by getting rid of that, or even giving them just the option of a callback will make some customers happier. You can increase occupancy with callback. So because it's smoothing out the demand, you can actually fill in some of the gaps where agents would be idle and not occupied. It's ready for extreme demand, and weather is a classic example where QBuster is used. You can have done your finest forecasting and the finest scheduling, and then it snows, and in the insurance world, I think next week when it thaws, they'll probably have extreme demand as well. So that's really important, and it's vital to efficiently manage the process. So by that we mean don't just set it up once and leave it alone, but keep looking at those metrics, keep looking at customer experience, and keep looking at how the system is optimally deployed.
And Stuart, I understand this is the sort of QBack technology is something that you use within your organisation. How do you find?
Correct. I mean, an example of that last night, Jonty. I mean, one of our call centres is based over in Wales. They got hit with snow last night, about 5 o'clock. So we took the decision to actually close that operation to get the guys home safe and sound. What we actually did was route all of our first notification claims calls into our operation over in the east side of the country. And then as a direct result, we used the callback facility that Netcall provide us with. to manage the increase in volume, and therefore, we were able to handle the customer. Yes, they were obviously leaving their details, and we were then calling them back, but at least we were setting an expectation to that customer.
Yeah. So from a customer perspective, how does this type of solution work? They dial up presumably the same number as normal, is it?
They ring through on exactly the same number as normal. From an experience point of view, they'll go through the IVR. They will then come into the call centre. After about a 15-second wait, if there is a queue forming and there's more than 5 calls queuing within our operation, we actually offer them that service. What then happens is that call is then held within a queue, and when the next available agent becomes available, we will give that customer a call back. The customer also has the option as well to, if they wish to, select the time of day where they would like to be called back. So, for example, people might call through in the lunch period. Well, actually, it's not convenient to call back until, say, after 6 o'clock in an evening, and they've got that ability to do so.
Yeah, okay, that's excellent. And is that well received by customers?
It's well received by customers, and it's also, believe it or not, well received by staff as well.
That's interesting. And we've been asked a question, Ryan has said, is a callback procedure a normal process for call centres? Stuart, you probably, would you say it's very widespread?
I think it's widespread. I mean, it depends on the type of organisation that you are as well. Many organisations that I've worked with in the past, it's been the set precedent to try and maintain the service level, and therefore take callbacks from customers as they come through, and try and basically plough through the call queue to make sure you're delivering to your service levels. However, obviously with that issue there, then you've got potentially pieces of paper floating around the office. They could be lost. However, with the callback solution, because it's all automated, you're never ever going to miss that customer.
Yeah, and I guess, Richard, this works best where you've got peaky, I would imagine, peaky levels of calls where you've got a queue for 15, 20 minutes and then it goes quiet. Does it also work in, I guess, not so well in longer, if you're busy all the time? Does it work?
It's an interesting question. Certainly in terms of the contact center productivity, it works best where you have peaks and troughs of demand, because then you can smooth out that and you can improve occupancy. We do find that even in environments where it's very high occupancy and you don't handle a single extra call, you still have a benefit in terms of customer experience. So if you just imagine that instead of each of your customers waiting for 5 minutes, you've got a computer waiting for 5 minutes, you're not handling any more calls, but each of those customers is happier that you're doing that for them. So a great example we had a couple of years ago was with Portman Travel, and I won't try and pronounce it, but the Icelandic volcano that erupted. So, are you going to pronounce it for us?
I can't remember what it's called.
And they had a whole load of high-value customers who couldn't get back to the UK or all throughout Europe, so they had to ring into somewhere. And they did all the right stuff. They got management on the phones. They shared. They're multi-skilled, but there was still a massive demand. But rather than having these high-value customers just waiting on their mobile phones in a far-off country in a queue, by offering a callback, they could really help with customer experience and customer satisfaction. So, works well in both scenarios. It works best for productivity if you've got peaks and troughs, but in terms of customer experience, it doesn't really matter what the occupancy levels are like.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And we've had Elizabeth has come on and said that Elizabeth has said we are a travel insurance business and successfully managed the callback process. Works very well for customers and for the call centre as well. So.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that many QBuster customers have already been through other types of callback scenario. So sometimes you'll hear a term call snatching, for example, where you get agents just to capture customer details and ring them back. We've been to places where they've tried to route calls from IVR into voicemail. So it's often the case that other tactics have been attempted, but fundamentally what you want to do is not have the customer queue for a longer time than is necessary, and then if you can automate the callback process, that makes it just so much simpler.
Okay, excellent.
So my summary then really is, especially in terms of staffing strategies, think the unthinkable. It doesn't have to be the standard shifts. think about different patterns. If you've got the workforce management tools, then you can have a play and really look at different long-term strategies for things like 4x10 or 4.5 or part-times. Quite often we see that weekend working is underutilized as well, so that's something that you can have a look at. The technology can help, so rather than getting in the way of delivering good service, you should be able to find that technology can help you deliver a better service, especially in queue times. Have a look at the process and make sure it's sustainable. So you really want to have something that's got a light touch, so you don't want to have to necessarily pull out a whole load of different processes because it's busy. You should really have the business rules in place such that when it becomes busy, everything else kicks into place. And one thing that's really worthwhile doing, and if you can get your senior management to do it, give them the option to ring your call centre at 9:30 on a Monday morning and walk in your customer's shoes. It's the classic sort of back to the floor stuff. I'm sure if CEOs were ringing their call centres on a Monday morning in peak times, you'd probably find it easier to get some more staff.
One would hope so. I guess that's a fairly brave strategy to do it.
Yeah.
To do it at times. Well, thank you very much for that. We're going to go to another poll now, which is what leads to long queues in your contact center? So just like to explore what is causing the problem within the with queues. So the options to vote on are a lack of staff, problem, and you can vote on more than one here. Problems matching staff with calls. This may be where you've got enough staff, but not necessarily at the right time. Abnormal numbers of calls, which is just sort of not routinely, but just sort of suddenly you just get lots of calls. Marketing promotions, the old marketing department who likes to send out promotions without necessarily telling people, or the weather. So we're just going to wait for you to vote on there. Richard, which one do you think is likely to come up top on this one?
Lack of staff. No.
Lack of staff.
Certainly whenever we go to call centres, it is a common theme that marketing have done something to us. So I'll see how high that is.
Okay, well we'll just close that and share the results and see if you're right. Well, close. Lack of staff came up second. Abnormal numbers of calls comes up, and I know that lots of IVRs say sorry we're experiencing very high volumes at the moment, but that actually does seem to be the case that it just sometimes it just comes up.
Yeah. Sometimes we see that can be caused by, for example, competition doing something to you. Yeah. So competition changing prices, and also things like regulation as well. So we certainly saw a few years ago when bank base rates were moving around that would have a big impact in mortgage businesses. So you couldn't really forecast for that. The Monetary Policy Committee, you didn't know what they were going to do at the time. Yeah. So that can lead to abnormal calls. Yeah.
So there's certainly quite a range. Marketing promotions and the weather certainly seem to be affecting people, as do matching staff with calls. Just like to dwell down into that bit, because maybe your answer isn't there, but I'd like to just explore now within the audience, what is your biggest problem with call queuing? So maybe the cause or the effect of that. So if you'd like to type that into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen, if you'd like to type that in now, please. Just takes a little while for people to type that in. What we're starting to see is Paul says it's due to spikes. Richard says it's due to system errors. Steve says it's a lack of staff. Kathy says high handling time from the agents. We did a webinar on that last week. Sam says inconsistent waiting times leading to unpredictable abandon figures. Be interesting to draw the abandon curves on there. Unplanned changes on IT infrastructure, says Eamon. Ryan says month-end spikes. Lack of staff, says Mick. Richard says SLA delivery. So I guess not quite sure how that one would work. Cetal says lack of staff. Sebastian calls spikes. Kane says how to prioritize the calls that are being queued. So I guess that it's priority is a difficult one because you're keeping everyone the same way. Sarah says motivation of staff to balance getting quality time with the current customer and then to move on to the next one in the queue. Yusuf has said rebound calls. I guess that's tied into your point on first call resolution. Andrew says that sheer weight of calls come in during seasonal peak, lasting a few short weeks, which is impossible to staff up sufficiently. So I don't know what business you're in there, Andrew. I know certainly water companies send a sort of annual bill out. That can be a real problem, particularly if you've also got the regulator on your back. Alexandria says AHT and ASA due to lack of staff. Harpreet has said increased handling time. Nicola has said balancing quality and answer times. I guess quality is an interesting one there, Richard. To it's getting there quickly, but it's also about doing the right thing once you've got them.
That's right, and so that's why it's it's multiple strategies to handle this, because obviously if you handle more calls but reduce the quality, then you're not really getting the effect that you want. So it's multiple variables in here.
And Stuart, one of the very common ones there is call spikes, which seem to just sort of pop up. How do you address those, do you think?
Well, I think there's two things. I mean, obviously you've got the callback facility. You've also got to understand what's driving them spikes. So, could it be that you've got particular issues with website usage that can sometimes drive them? Certainly if a website goes down and you're not aware of it until the next customer tells you, that can sometimes influence. I think the other thing as well with regards to your call spike as well is trying to understand, for those call centres that perhaps open at 8 o'clock in the morning that aren't 24 hours, do you suddenly see a big rush? Saturday morning's a classic. You open at 9, you see a big surge for the first hour. It kills you with regards to your service level. So therefore, through the use of Netcall and the callback facility they provide, what that's actually meant for us is we've actually opened it up at 8:30 in the morning, and it's actually captured a number of them calls, which has therefore reduced that spike first thing in the morning.
Yeah, indeed. And we're now got on to the point of the webinar where we share tips with the rest of the audience. We've got quite a number of questions coming through as well. The first tip we've been sent in by Francois. So we try to get our team leaders to jump in when there are either many calls handling or have been handling for a long time. That's certainly quite a good way of increasing the pool of people within the contact center. Nicola says we allow agent flexi time when they come in later or leave earlier and sacrifice some break time for this. We benefit because we have more available agents at peak times. Agents benefit from flexible working, dropping off kids at school, etc. I guess you talked about flexible, Richard, flexible strategies there. How does that sort of tie in with the sort of ideas you had?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you also get there is the win-win as well. So you get the agent buy-in because they can have perhaps better hours at work, for example, dropping the kids off, but you also get the benefit in the business as well, covering those peaks.
And Ian has said, in customer service environments, understand the root cause for calls coming in, and then working from most frequent downwards, removing the underlying issue. By far the most effective way of shortening queues rather than trying to management. And I guess, Stuart, that comes with your comment about things on the website and so on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I suppose I was implicit that we should be doing that as a matter of course, and really I was looking at once you've got a queue there, but absolutely right. Yeah. In most of the analysis, there's a very high proportion of customer service calls that businesses have caused themselves, failure demand.
Mick says we have calls from our reps or internal company mobiles on a lower priority than sales customer calls for our geographic number. Neil says when outbound calls are high, we would initiate predictive calling, and a portion of the outbound queues blend with inbound calls. The reason for this is we lose some sort of efficiency gains when we initiate blending in preview. This will allow us to concentrate on inbound and outbound calls. And indeed, in many contact centers, there's quite a good case of actually just delaying the outbound calls if they're not callbacks. Good planning in advance, real-time optimization throughout the day before the event. Stuart, do you do a lot of real-time optimizing during the day, or do you tend to set things the day before?
No, we tend to do everything on the day. I mean, just something I'd like to draw on with regards to what Richard was talking about earlier is whilst many call centres try and set their shift patterns in advance, so that the staff get plenty of advance notification of what they'd be working. Something that we brought in about 18 months ago was something that we call reserve working, which is where we confirm to the advisors they will work in a certain number of hours across a period of the week. So in this case, I'll give the example of it might be between 9 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock in the evening, Monday to Friday, and they might be requested to work some of Saturday. And we actually confirm to them their exact hours the week before. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility. So if marketing go and drop in something that we weren't aware of, the weather's going to be slightly different, it enables us to flex our workforce accordingly. But of course, also there's also the on-the-day real-time optimization, breaks, lunches, being prepared to turn around and cancel training, and moving stuff accordingly to basically get your service levels and get to those customers.
Oh, very good indeed. Gemma has said to handle our peaks when we have a complex IVR that drills down on options, and then we bring in temps during peak times to handle the calls on the easy-to-train lines, train within a few days. We also recruit these temps on flexible hours, so we can flex to meet the needs. If the temps work well, we can train them on a more complex skill. So I guess that's very much about flexing type of calls. Neil said during high call periods we redirect customers either onto the website, send an email, or wait for the next available agent, but also advise in the announcement what the expected wait time could be. You mentioned that Richard, could be potentially a damaging thing if you put the wait time up.
Yeah, there's a balance there really. In an ideal world, you would always want to give an accurate estimated wait time for customers, but it may be the case that an accurate estimated wait time is not something that you want to communicate. So there can be a balance there depending on how extreme that peak is. We also find that sometimes some of the estimated wait calculations, especially as you start to get busy, tend to underestimate the peak time, and as you get a bit quieter, they tend to overestimate the queue time. So in an ideal world, you'd always offer estimated wait time, but there could be some operational challenges to give you an accurate number.
And it'd be interesting to Neil to see if you found any problems of people hanging up when they hear that wait time. Darren said we touched on it. A queue busting is a great way of managing queues. A ramp up of back office team leaders, etc., as the calls increase. This works when used sparingly, in my experience. However, can be very effective. Where are we now? Using queuing time to relay sales messages, keep interest and informs and reinforces caller opinion. So I guess that's all about on-call messaging of keeping people updated. Anything other than Vivaldi, I'd say on this one.
But people often have a very bad reaction to hearing your call is important more than a couple of times. So if you can dynamically alter in-queue messages, that can be quite powerful as well. People can get very cynical if, for example, every 30 seconds they hear a comfort message, which they know is not necessarily reflected in their experience at that time.
Yeah, and something that ties very much in with something that Dave Appleby told me once is that you do tend to get clusters of calls around the hour as people sort of come out of meetings or Coronation Street ends or so on. So Dave said we stopped taking breaks being taken in the first 15 minutes of every hour, as we found trends of calls tend to be in this period, as people tend to plan calls on the hour. Stuart, is that something you've got down to the granular sort of 15-minute intervals, or for your planning purposes?
No, yeah, we work everything to 15-minute increments. Without the 15-minute increment, then essentially it doesn't help with your balance of your optimizing on the intraday side. Because obviously if you're seeing them spikes in the first 15 minutes, and obviously you need to make sure your breaks and lunches are moved from them particular times.
Yeah, so certainly anyone out there who's planning on the half hour might be worth looking down to the 15 minutes. We've got quite a number of tips here. I'm just going to we're going to jump back to some tips later. Just wanted to get a few questions through. Rihanna said, can you link patient record systems such as Cerner? I guess this is tied into the triage system.
Certainly you can link into back office systems. I'm not familiar with that specific system, but we have experience with, for example, EMIS, which is a GP appointment management system, and we've got experience in NHS Trust with other patient administration systems. So it can be done, and it's a sensible thing to do to ensure that you accurately route calls, ensure that you get the information to the agents as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Richard has said, what do you do if you do not have control over the forecasting, just receive the schedules that needs to be adhered to? Well, I think probably on one of those you need to probably get yourself a bit higher up the value chain, and otherwise I guess it's all hands to the pump on that one.
Yeah, I mean there can be, we sometimes find environments where there are, for example, physical constraints. So it's not possible to get another desk into the call centre, for example. So sometimes there are immovable objects. And that's really where you start to try and use some of the other strategies as well, the triage, the proactive contact, the first contact resolution. It will have an impact over time as well.
Yeah. And Francois said we're an accounting software call centre. Financial year end is our worst period with huge numbers of calls. Anyone have any ideas on how to successfully best deal with these large call volumes? I guess we've gone through a number of those already, but if anyone in the audience has any ideas, if you want to send them in, we'll take a look. Jennifer said, what's a reasonable hold time threshold, an average handling time for a life assurance company? Richard, you had the 7 points earlier.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly found that it depends upon the whereabouts in the business you are. If it's new business, then it's a really short hold time because there are many substitutes available. So certainly we find in insurance sales, you've got to be rapid or else you might lose that customer. In terms of handle time, that's something that Stuart might be able to help out with. Again, it would depend upon the complexity of the interaction, and certainly you can do things like improve your agent desktop and get more information to your agents to help improve handle time. I don't know if Stuart has an idea on handle times there.
Yeah, I mean, we currently run, I think, somewhere between about 12 and 18 minutes. I mean, it sounds quite an excessive amount of time, but we build in a lot of soft skills into the calls. We want them customers to feel valued, and essentially we want them to go away from us knowing that they've got all their questions answered, which in turn then obviously reduces any potential calls coming back through after sale.
Indeed. Yeah. So Sarah's asked the question, is putting management on the phones the right solution for calls queuing? I guess if you could call up the chief exec, say, we're having a busy day with the snow, do you want to come down to the call centre and bring your management team with you?
I think as a one-off exercise, it will probably be illuminating anyway. I think somebody mentioned one of the points earlier, it's not something that you can really do all of the time because you end up then having to have your team leaders handling calls rather than managing. Yeah. But certainly periodically, and if it's extreme demand, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, and with the old naval analogy, all hands to the pumps at times. Mark said we use in-queue messaging to update our callers of sold-out events, which causes our abandon rate to rise, but increases conversion. Does anyone use this method of in-call marketing? So I guess if there's anyone in the audience that would like to send that in.
Yeah, and certainly we've found that where there's a finite supply of something, then a callback may not be a great answer in that scenario, because if you call back somebody when you've already sold out an event, you're just wasting everybody's time. So certainly where you've got a finite supply of a good or service, then an in-queue message I think would be sensible.
Okay, well we're going to jump back to a few more tips. Nathan has said offer training on non-working days, i.e. Saturdays. You'll be surprised how many staff members would be willing to do this if it means the day-to-day job is less stressful. You can then plan overtime to your budget rather than to when spikes and seasonal high volumes happen, which we suggest can be unpredictable. Certainly that's
a good one.
Yeah. Stuart, have you tried bringing staff in on Saturdays for training?
Not on a Saturday, no. We haven't experienced that requirement as yet. However, I think one thing, just picking up on what Nathan said there, I think it's, we talk about telling our customers that we've got wait times and, we're busy at the moment, all the rest of it. But do we actually tell our staff in advance, we are going to be busy, we may be putting these tactical plans in place, you may be taking some additional overflow calls. It's certainly something that we did about 18 months, 2 years ago, started actually communicating out to the staff when we expected to be busy. And as a result, they seem to have a bit more appetite for it. They know they're going to be busy, and therefore, as a direct result, they come in with the right mindset, if that makes sense.
Indeed. Well, we've had a couple of responses in for from the audience. Penny says to Dave, I think you'll find is repeat callers in the next 45 minutes that have failed to initially get through. And Victoria said that the reply for Francois in terms of the very high numbers of calls, we don't allow any holidays during the busy period, and agree a level of overtime with senior management in advance so that we can use as necessary to save on delays. The overtime is agreed with the staff who know it will only be used as needed. We also have worked hard to proactively contact and inform customers ahead of year end to reduce incoming call volumes. I certainly think it's a rather nice...
Yeah. If I just go back to the previous one on repeat callers as well, that's something that really is worth some analysis, and if you can't do it on your local ACD technology, your telco could probably help out as well, but that's to analyze calls by CLI, and we find in lots of environments, especially at busy times, there's an awful lot of noise with retries and redials, so you may find that what you think is your peak level of demand actually has an awful lot of redialed numbers in there. So if you can get to them in the first instance, then you find the overall volume goes down as well. So yeah, and an analysis of repeat callers is very important.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to take a couple more tips. Steve says we have an automated switchboard system for internal communication and external staff that avoid our call center staff having to manage these calls. I guess that was in response to the prioritizing customers over internal calls. Lindsay says use staff from other departments to take specific calls during peak periods. Also roll half-hour lunches and reschedule off-phone activity.
Yep.
I think that's quite a nice one. Olav Meiji says we can also diversify our call center in such a way that we can handle different calls that are handled by unique agents. So I guess that if you've got repeat calls, it's the ability to put a repeat call straight back into the original agent that handled it. Certainly that would increase customer satisfaction and, if you like, second call resolution. I'm not sure what that would do to overall queue durations. I'd have to probably get a spreadsheet out and work that one out. Romeo says, Romeo says, during peak times, calls are diverted to other teams who have different call answer priority and whose main task is back office menu. Certainly that seems to be quite a common thing to share with the back office. Stuart, do you do a lot of sharing with back office?
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, without the back office department at times, you know, we wouldn't actually achieve service levels.
No, certainly it's very useful to do that, and certainly building links with other departments is probably one of the most useful things that we can do. We're coming towards the end of the hour now.